Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, coast to coast, website thisweekinamerica.us. Thank you for joining us on the program. As mentioned, Michael Morgan is our guest on the show today. He's been an instructor in CranioSacral Therapy for the Upledger Institute for over 18 years. Now, he's taught this technique extensively in North America, Canada, Russia, Mexico, Argentina, New Zealand, Australia, Iceland, and other countries all around the world. After experiencing firsthand the effects of Alzheimer's and dementia with the stepmother and sister-in-law, Michael pioneered and coordinated research in the application of craniosacral therapy to dementia and Alzheimer's disease and served as a published consultant for a study. He earned his BA in physics and philosophy from UC Berkeley and an MA degree in interdisciplinary studies from Maharishi International Institute in Fairfield, Iowa. He's developed classes for therapists and laypersons entitled CranioSacral Therapy for Longevity, as well as advanced training classes for craniosacral therapists. An extensive background. His website is very simple, preventingalzheimers.com. You can go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on directly. And the book we're talking about is The Body Energy Prescription. Michael Morgan with us on This Week in America. Michael, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us on the show.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you.
This is really exciting, what you're doing and taking around the world. And we'll talk about the fact that it's all around the world. And I'm reading this for the first time, and I'm like, we got to get Michael on the show and talk about this. This is really something that's basically revolutionary and will help a number of people. Let's talk, just lay the groundwork with craniosacral therapy. What is it exactly that we're talking about?
Well, craniosacral therapy, the modern version, was developed by my mentor, Dr. John Upledger, in the mid-1970s. He was an osteopath that really started his work in Michigan and then down in Florida. And he basically, based on the work of a lot of osteopaths from the past, found out that if you could just gently listen to the body and listen to the flow of what's called cerebral spinal fluid, that it's such a fundamental part of the system of the body, it could create some very great changes. So, you know how a doctor might feel the pulse, right? Or
yes.
A nurse put their hand on your chest and feel the rising and falling of your lungs. Well, craniosacral is a little more subtle, but there's basically, and we'll have a little picture we can show you, an expansion and contraction of the spine and the brain. And as we train people, which is very simple to do, you can actually feel this kind of rising and falling, kind of like the pulse or the respiration within the body.
We'll talk in a few minutes about Alzheimer's and dementia and the experiences you had, experiences so many face. But talk about the application now with Alzheimer's, and I think maybe you were ready to do that. Talk about how this is really revolutionary in what you're able to do.
Well, that's a really good question. And yes, what I was about to mention is that craniosacral therapy has been around for about 30 or 40 years, and we've trained over 100,000 people worldwide. So we started out realizing, well, this is good for headaches, it's good for migraines, it's good for people with lower back pain. And then also we started to work with children, which is my initial thrust, and work with children with autism and also cerebral palsy, and got some really good results. And how I fell into Alzheimer's is that my mother-in-law, Edith Morgan, and then my stepmother, Carol, both contracted, so to speak, Alzheimer's. And I got interested in seeing how craniosacral could apply for that. So it started out with a lot of things that we've been working on for years and having great results. And I just extended my kind of research, so to speak, into the area of prevention of Alzheimer's and dementia as well.
The book we're talking about is The Body Energy Prescription. That'll give you some great information. Great information as well at the website, preventingalzheimers.com. Our guest on the program is Michael Morgan. Talk a little bit about, and you emphasize this, and it's fascinating as you're reading, a correct diet and the application of the therapy we're talking about. Actually, what you feel that can lower the risk of Alzheimer's and dementia.
Yeah, the actual title of the book is The Body Energy Longevity Prescription, because longevity is part of it. And the subtitle is How Craniosacral Therapy Helps Prevent Alzheimer's and Dementia While Improving the Quality of Your Life. That's a pretty long subtitle. But the basic idea is I discovered this kind of going backwards. The first thing I did is I realized that based on what happened with my stepmother and sister-in-law, that as I started to look into it, I realized that, part of what we do in craniosacral therapy is we kind of train people to listen, so to speak, with our hands, the flow of cerebral spinal fluid, okay? And I found out quite by accident, doing some research, that people with senile dementia, as they develop these symptoms, their flow of cerebral spinal fluid starts to dry up, like a river drying up. And then I realized, just by accident, that if we can increase the flow of cerebral spinal fluid, as we do in craniosacral therapy, or what we call CST, this could have a beneficial effect. So, in a river, how as the river level drops, the mud and the silt and the sludge just kind of clogs up everything else,
yes,
right? So this is what happens in the brain, is that there's more inflammation in the brain, we found, and that causes the brain to kind of clog up, and that's where these amyloid plaques, which are indicative of Alzheimer's and neurofibrillary tangles, start to really show up. So we realized if we could increase the flow of the river, meaning if we could increase the flow of cerebral spinal fluid through craniosacral therapy, we could get some beneficial adults, and that's what we found in our initial research. So that's the first piece of the three, is craniosacral therapy.
We're talking with Michael Morgan. The book is The Body Energy Longevity Prescription. As I'm looking at it, the biggest word on the cover is longevity. That's the one I miss, so we'll have to see if there are any applications for failing vision. It's right there, The Body Energy Longevity Prescription. Website is preventingalzheimers.com. Is Alzheimer's reversible? We talk about maybe that we can limit some of the risk. Do you see it as being reversible?
Well, and I have an upcoming TED Talk where I'm speaking about just this. So think of this. You have the river and the mud and the sludge and the silt, right?
Yes.
And what people independently are verifying from what I've done, there's some researchers at the University of Rochester, and they're saying that the brain is actually very efficient at draining toxins and waste products out of the brain, especially if it gets enough sleep, which is another piece. But craniosacral therapy, if it can help encourage that drainage system, which may be clogged up as we get older. Sometimes when we get older, we get a little older and creaky. We don't move quite so well, right? Well, so it is with the brain. And so the idea is if we can increase the flow of cerebral spinal fluid, if it's dropped significantly to more normal levels, then the theory would be, and this is what we're seeing in our preliminary research, that we could wash away all those accumulated plaques and toxins. It's like if you run your car through a car wash and there's all those dark specks.
Yes.
So you run it through the car wash, then you put the nozzle on real close by to get some of the old specks, especially off the front, windshield and the front license plate. So our thought is that if we can increase the flow of cerebral spinal fluid, and sometimes you'll need a little more intensive therapy, then you can start to actually see improvement in memory. And that's what we found in some of the initial research that I helped coordinate, that people with mid to late stage dementia actually started to regain their memories and recognize their caregivers, feed themselves, so on and so forth.
When people look at Alzheimer's, and I believe the statistics now are like 5 million, that's going to go up dramatically over the course of the coming years. It's something that we all dread. Is there an application in using the therapy? I mean, do we need to have some signs before we pursue this, or is it something that we should be doing as we age to see if maybe there is a problem, and then we can alleviate that problem before it does become full-blown?
Well, as Dr. Dean Ornish said, an ounce of prevention for a pound of cure.
Yes, yes.
Sometimes people kind of ignore things. I'm that way too until there's a crisis, right? But if you can prevent the plaque and these neurofibrillary tangles from forming in the brain in the first place, then you're in better shape. And one of the things I found in my research is that people with Alzheimer's just don't all of a sudden one day wake up with it. What happens is in many cases, for decades before, there's what's called these diseases of aging, I call them. They'll have inflammatory processes in the body, such as diabetes, that's a big one, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, MS, any kind of itis like an arthritis, any kind of disease which may be autoimmune, and these build up. And in certain cases, we don't know exactly why, but in certain cases, the inflammation in the body overflows into the brain, and that's when people start to exhibit symptoms of memory loss. But it's better, as you mentioned, to nip it in the bud and catch it years before. And our thought is that if you can do just some regular craniosacral therapy on a weekly or monthly basis and make some changes in diet and exercise that I haven't mentioned yet, then you're really stacking the cards in your favor. But having said that, even people that are at risk or early to mid-stage dementia, we feel we can help kind of roll things back, stop the momentum, and then bring it back the other way. So that's also what we see as a possibility with this program and technique.
Michael Morgan is our guest on This Week in America. The book we're talking about is The Body Energy Longevity Prescription. All of this information available, and there's a ton of it. It's wealth of information at preventingalzheimers.com. You can link onto our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and go directly to Michael's website. You talk about Alzheimer's may have a genetic basis, but that's a very small part of the picture, and you alluded to this a second ago. Genetic expression can be changed by diet and exercise. Let's talk about the roles of diet and exercise in preventing Alzheimer's.
Well, genetic expression first, and this is a good point. There's a new and growing theory with a lot of functional medicine doctors that feel food is actually medicine that can help. And the idea is it's called epigenetics, above the genetics. And the idea is that you can change gene expression by the behaviors in your environment. So when I found, for example, that 40% of people in an Alzheimer's unit have diabetes, I started to look, well, like what's up with that? And I found that what happens with diabetes, for example, is that if you have foods like sugars and breads and carbohydrates that create more inflammation in the body, that will raise insulin resistance, which is mirrored in the brain. And what happens if there's resistance, then it means there can't be absorption. And unfortunately, about 60% of all the glucose manufactured in the body goes to the brain because the brain converts it and generates it into energy. Well, if there's too much resistance in the brain, the brain literally starts to starve to death in a sea of plenty. It can't utilize what it already has. So the idea is that if you can change the diet to maybe more protein and leafy green vegetables, things like that, you can actually change things and remove the fuel which keeps aggravating and fueling the Alzheimer's dementia.
That's interesting because at some point people start saying, I'm in my 60s, 70s, it's probably too late to do anything. And I think you just said, no, it's not. There are things that you can do to at least lessen your risk.
Yeah, and I'm a baby boomer too. And right now, like some of the diet I'm changing, an old dog can still change tricks. And what I mentioned in some of my other blogs and in the book is that most people, when they say diet, right away they think, oh my God, I've done something wrong. It's like a punishment.
Yes.
But as I mentioned in some of my webinars and so forth, it's like, you know what? If you can make food tasty and it's pleasant, then it's not a punishment and your body will not create this inflammatory response in the same way. So there is a way to do it in a healthy way that it doesn't seem like a punishment. So that's good to understand. Otherwise, people will probably not want to have the incentive to change.
We're talking about CranioSacral Therapy and the application, in this case, with Alzheimer's and dementia. If people are listening and thinking, but that's a big word, I got a concept, and I'm going to go look at Michael's website, which is preventingalzheimers.com, and get more information. If they want to take that information and go to their doctor and go start asking questions, how do they go about doing that? Do most in the medical community, will they even understand what you're talking about?
It depends on the doctor. Like my functional medicine doctor, they're a little more alternative. They're regular MDs, but they also understand nutrition as well. So here's something I'd suggest. If they go to my website, preventingalzheimers.com, one of the things they can click on is fill out a little form that says find a local therapist in their area. So they can find that. We can refer them to a local craniosacral therapist. They can have a discussion with them, and then that therapist can also refer them to their doctors as well. But there's a growing number of doctors that are beginning to understand how this is applicable, and it can't hurt anything, and it may very well help.
If somebody is listening and they're part of the medical community and it's like, that's interesting, I wish there's more that we could do when we see people come in with early stages of dementia. How do they go about finding out about training programs, finding more so they can actually be someone that's going to be applying the therapy?
Well, again, if you go to my website, I have a list of classes like that I teach around the country. There's 2-day introductory classes. So either lay people or medical practitioners can get a background. Upledger Institute that I teach for also has a 4-day more formalized class. So they can take any level of training, but even a 2-day introductory class, they can learn some of the fundamentals so they can feel it on themselves. That's really where the rubber meets the road. If they can feel the change on themselves, then they all go, oh yeah, I can see. And almost everyone, to a man or woman, feels immediately some deeper relaxation when they start and have the work of craniosacral therapy. They just get more relaxed. And that lowers the stress in the body, which has a ripple effect on all these other symptoms we've been speaking about.
A couple minutes left in the program. I mentioned in the beginning you've been an instructor in craniosacral therapy for over 18 years. You've taught this, you've lectured worldwide, you've had articles that have been published. You got into this because of the effects you saw of Alzheimer's and dementia with your stepmother and your sister-in-law. As you see things like progressing over the course of this period, the last 18 years, is this exciting for you? Does you feel like you're on the cutting edge of something that's going to make life a whole lot better for millions of people?
Oh, yeah. Well, I had never believed that I would be standing looking at boldly suggesting this could have this effect because, for example, Rush Hospital about 2 years ago did a study, and it's currently believed that, according to the American Alzheimer's Association, Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death. But a researcher at Rush Hospital found out that, well, if you look at death records and how they're kept, it's actually about 500,000 because a lot of people die of Alzheimer's from cardiac and respiratory distress. So it's really about 500,000 deaths, if you look at it that way, about the 3rd leading cause of death in the U.S. per year. So I'm thinking, yeah, if we could make a change, even make a dent in that, even a bit, that could be significant. So I'm honored to think that maybe, because of my relatives, and I speak to plenty of people who tell me, yeah, I lost a mom or a dad to Alzheimer's, or they currently have it. Mike, could you help? So I'm honored to think we could make a dent in this and make a difference. Yeah.
It's hard to think of someone who doesn't have a family member who is going through just the sad state of losing memory that's part of Alzheimer's and dementia. And it's so fearful for people as they age, like in the boomer category as well. As you get there, every time you can't remember where you put your keys, you're thinking, oh my God, what is happening to me now? Right. That there is something out there that you really need to look into. The book by Michael Morgan is The Body Energy Longevity Prescription. The website is very simple, preventingalzheimers.com. You go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on directly to Michael's website. Michael Morgan has been our guest on This Week in America. We will stay in touch with Michael and do more programs. Michael, you're doing great work. Thank you so much for being with us on the program. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
You're listening to This Week in America. All the information on Michael and all of our guests available at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Stay tuned. Back after these messages.